Larry Itliong. Larry Itliong. Larry Itliong. And I'm going to give you all a little history lesson, okay? How did Larry Itliong get involved with our farm worker movement? Well, I do have to say that I have the great honor, and I will brag about it, that I organized Larry Itliong. So, before the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez and myself, we belonged to another organization called the Community Service Organization. And there were farm workers that had been killed in Stockton, some of the Bracero workers. So we started a farm worker chapter, and I was put in charge of that chapter. And so I formed an organization called AWOC, Agricultural Workers Association. So I had an Okie organizer, I had a black organizer, I had a Mexican organizer, but hey, we need a Filipino organizer. So growing up in Stockton, California, I had a lot of my friends who were Filipino, and so everybody that I knew, I would say to them, I am looking for a Filipino organizer, and everybody gave me one name. You got to find Larry Itliong. You got to find Larry Itliong. So I found him. I found Larry Itliong. He was living in a place called Conway Homes. It was a new development of houses that they had built. And so I went to his home and knocked on his door, and I said, we are forming a group of farm workers, and I would like to see if you could help us. I had a house meeting with him, because that's the way that we organize in the farm worker movement, with Larry and his then wife. And so I was able to get him to join. So Larry helped me, and with our other organizers, we were able to organize quite a large group of workers. We had a couple of hundred farm workers. So we had some, I'm trying to make the story shorter, but we had some priests that were helping us, and they went to Washington, D.C., and they talked to the head of the AFL-CIO, George Meany. And so they sent a representative down to see if we really had some workers organized. And when they saw how many people we had, they were very, very impressed. Not only, in our farm workers, we had an integrated group. We had the Mexican workers, the Filipino workers, the Anglo workers, the Okie workers also, and of course the Mexicans. So they sent an organizer out there, and we set up an organization called AWOC, Agriculture Workers Organizing Committee. So our committee, AWA, became AWOC. So I was in charge of doing some of the hiring. So all the people that have been helping me, the volunteers, we hired them. So we hired Larry, along with some of the other organizers. Now, this is kind of an important issue. Larry Itliong and some of the other Filipino brothers, they were all crew leaders or labor contractors. So what they decided that what they would do is that they would start trying to organize the workers through the labor contractor system. But that didn't work. That worked really good with the Filipinos, because the Filipinos, they always negotiated with the growers. They got better wages. They also provided their own cooks, so they couldn't rip them off on the food. But that didn't work so well with the Mexican workers. So I left, and Larry stayed behind. Larry and I always kept our relationship. When I came to Delano then, because Cesar was doing the same thing in Oxnard, organizing workers, and he turned them over to another group and then fell apart. And so that's when Cesar said, we have to start our own union, which we did. But Larry and I always kept our communications and our relationships. So when I would go to Stockton, I would call Larry. When Larry would come to Delano, he would call me, because I had moved down to Delano from Stockton at that point in time. So when they were going to do the strike in Delano, Larry called me. They had just had a strike in Coachella, and the strike had been very successful. They got a wage increase up to $1.25 an hour. At that point, the workers were only earning about 70 cents an hour, and but with that strike, they went up to $1.25. And so Larry called me and said, we're thinking of doing a strike in Delano. And there was a lot of friction because some of the workers said, we just had a strike. We don't want to go into another strike, you know? I remember one of the brothers saying, our pockets are empty. He pulled his pockets out of his pants. He said, our pockets are empty. We don't want to go on strike. So we weren't sure exactly how strong that strike was going to be. So the brothers went on strike on September the 8th. And then we thought, well, we'll wait and see what's going to happen. See if it's going to be a work stoppage or a real strike. Well, the Filipino brothers were met with such brutality. They were getting beaten up by some of the grower representatives. They shut off the lights and the gas and the water in the labor camps, so they couldn't even cook. They didn't even have water. And so the strike was on for about a week, and so we met with our executive board of the National Farmworkers Association, and we took a vote. Are we going to support the Filipino brothers, or are we going to wait? So we said, no, we're going to support them. And I have to say this too about Helen Chavez. We don't mention Helen a lot. Helen was a very, very strong woman. Very, very strong woman. So when we took that strike vote, I think we had about $700 in our bank account. That's all the money that we had for the National Farmworkers Association. And so we knew when we took that vote to support the strike, it was going to be hard times for everybody. And Cesar brought Helen into that meeting. She was not a board member. And so we went around the room, all of the officers took a vote to support the strike. And when we got to Helen, we all kept our breath because we didn't know what she was going to say. And then she said, of course we have to support the Filipino workers. We're a union, aren't we? We're a union, aren't we? And so that was it, okay? So, of course, the rest is history. The rest is history. Eventually we did merge with the National Farmworkers Association and AWOC, and we became the United Farmworkers Organizing Committee. But, I say this with pride, that I was able to organize Larry Itliong. A lot of things have been said about Larry today, about how tough he was, how courageous he was. I have to say one thing about Larry. I never, ever, in my presence, ever heard him swear. Never, never. He was very, very polite with women, always very, very courteous. But we all knew that Larry was very, very tough, okay? He was such a strong leader. The other thing that happened during the strike, of course, we had a hiring hall. And Larry had a lot of pressures on him because the way that the system used to work before, the crew leaders, they would be able to get money off of the boxes that the workers picked. Every box of grapes that the workers picked, the crew leader got money from every box. But they couldn't do that anymore. So we didn't have that system anymore. And so the other thing that we did is we integrated the crews. So the Filipino workers, the Mexican workers, the Puerto Rican workers, the black workers, they all mixed together. And guess what happened? A lot of marriages came out of that. And to this day, I don't know how that happened, because you had Mexican women who couldn't speak Ilocano, and of course, and you had Filipino workers who couldn't speak Spanish or English, but they all got married. I don't know how that happened. That is one of the great things that came out of the farm worker movement. But of course, we know that. I have to say, many of the brothers, they were older, and so, and you can imagine this, that Delano strike lasted for 5 years, and the brothers, the Manongs, they were there every day on the picket line. They never missed a day. They were every day on the picket line for 5 solid years, if you can imagine that. And of course, as you know, and then they went to the boycott. they went to New York City. Brother George, who was like 80 years old, he was one of the people who went to the boycott in New York. So the courage of the Filipino strikers was just incredible. It was just really, really amazing. And of course, guess what? They cooked for us, okay? So we didn't have to worry about, having to make breakfast for the kids every day, because the Filipino Hall would open early in the morning, and the kids would go to have breakfast there, and then we had lunch, and then we had dinner. And so they nourished not only with their spirit, but also with the food that they were able to cook every single day for us. And I do want to mention some of the other Filipino brothers that were part of the executive board. Brother Pete Velasco was the secretary-treasurer of the United Farm Workers. Andy Imutan, a vice president, and of course the great orator Philip Veracruz. These were all people that really contributed so much to the farm worker movement. So we all made history together, and I think it's something that we can all celebrate. But we do know that at the heart, and of course the leader of that of the Filipino brothers in the movement was Larry Itliong. He was absolutely the leader, and everybody respected him. Oh, and some of his relationships were strained, like I mentioned before, because the system had to be changed. And they mentioned Ben Gines. It was kind of interesting. I hadn't heard Ben Gines' name for a long time, but Ben Gines and Larry were very close. But then Ben Gines, the Teamsters Union, started to come in. And Ben Gines wanted to go with the Teamsters Union. And of course, Larry said no. Larry said no. And so that relationship was also very strained. And so I just want to thank everybody for celebrating Larry Itliong. He definitely needs to be celebrated for all of the great contribution that he did. And I want to also say thank you to Rob Bonta for introducing that bill for farm workers, because not only does this country need to know what the history of the Filipino farm workers was, but they need to know what the contribution of the Filipino community has been to the United States of America, okay? Because that has not been told. And also, if it were not for the Filipinos, the United States would never have won the war, World War II, because it was the Filipino guerrillas in the Philippines that saved the United States of America. The Hakbalahags, Listorok, and all of that history needs to be told. And also the history of how Filipinos won the independence from Spain, but it was the United States of America that stole that victory from them and went into the Philippines and killed hundreds and hundreds of Filipinos so that the United States could claim that victory. So there's a lot that needs to be told. We think of Larry Itliong, but the history of the Filipinos, the contributions to the United States, and also the disservice and the discrimination against Filipinos needs to be told. And so that is still something that we have to pursue so that people will know. And I think this is the moment that we can do that, because there's an awakening right now. We're going to have ethnic studies, but let's not forget, when we talk about ethnic studies, that we include the history of what the Filipinos and the United States have had to go through, have had to suffer, okay? And especially, and of course, every time I talk about this, I kind of tear up, how so many of the Filipinos were denied even to have families in the United States of America because of the laws that were passed here to prevent them from getting married. Lucky Larry Itliong did not obey any of those laws. As we know. So, and I want to thank Larry's family because of the sacrifices that they made. They, like my kids and Cesar's kids, often, they're the ones that really sacrifice, you might say, so their father could be a big leader in the farm worker movement. And I also want to thank all of you for having this celebration here. When you have a humble place here like Poplar, and it does have a history, who would know that Poplar has a history? Yeah, the first contract that the Farmworkers signed was with Shenley. And yes, we had an office here in Poplar. And of course, we have that famous moment that I hope some of you are able to read about that when Al Rojas, who was the organizer, was actually holed up in the building because he had all of these young people shooting bullets at our office. And Al called me and said, hey, we're under siege right now here, and we need some help. And so we had to come down here to help him. But it was really interesting. After that happened, when they were shooting bullets at the office, and our people were hunkered down and trying to stay alive, that when the police came, the sheriff's officer they said to these young white guys that were doing that, they said, okay, Billy, go home now. Okay, Billy, go home now. There was no punishment, no arrest. And that was a very, very scary moment. And so we had so many wonderful, courageous people that work with the farm worker movement. And so many of you are here today. And I would just like to say, if you can either stand or raise your hand, we have so many of the children of the farm workers that are here today. This is like a reunion, okay? Like a reunion. And we have judges here. We have educators. Lucia Vasquez is here. We have, of course, people that are working for Senator Caballero, okay? We have a city councilwoman. Por favor, se pueden parar. Could everybody stand up that had their family working in the farm worker movement here? And to see amazing, of course, that would include Rob also. Andres, I mean, just to see, not only is this a very historical moment that we're all here together, and we know that the movement continues, that it's not going to end, because we have all of you young people that are going to carry it forward.